Thank you and good morning. My name is Crystal Rivers. I'm a nutritionist in the Office of Nutrition Labeling and Dietary Supplements. And my presentation today is going to be on Nutrition and Supplement Facts Label Proposed Rule. As I mentioned before, today we'll be discussing FDA's proposed rule to revise the Nutrition and Supplement Facts Label. On March 3, 2014, FDA issued two proposed rules, one to revise the Nutrition Facts and Supplement Facts Label. The other rule proposes revisions to serving size requirements based on updated consumption data and proposes criteria for certain package sizes. My presentation will focus on the proposed updates to the content of the Nutrition Facts Label. In the interest of time, I will not address the proposed format changes. And next you will hear from my colleague, Sharisa Henderson, about the proposed rule to the serving sizes. And at the bottom of your screen is a link to FDA's website where you can find more information about this topic. Some of the key changes in the new proposal to update nutrition facts include no longer permitting the declaration of calories from fat, changes to the mandatory listing of vitamins and minerals, mandatory listing of added sugars, updated daily values for vitamins and minerals, definition of dietary fiber, daily values for subpopulations, and record keeping. I will expand more on each of these as we move through the presentation. As I just mentioned, we propose to no longer permit calories from fat. Current science supports a view that the type of fat is more relevant than overall total fat intake in the increased risk of chronic disease. Also, consumer research conducted by FDA has shown that removal of calories from fat from the label has no effect on consumers' judgment of a product's healthfulness and accuracy in identifying nutrient content of the product. We are also going to retain 2,000 calories as the reference energy intake level for setting daily values that are based on calories. For example, the DVs for fat and fiber are based on a percentage of calories. Another area where we are proposing changes are to the caloric values of some nutrients. For dietary fiber, we are going to retain 0 calories per gram for insoluble fiber and reduce the caloric value for soluble fiber from 4 calories to 2. For sugar alcohols, we are also proposing to codify different caloric values. For example, for isomalt and lactitol, it will be 2 calories per gram. For xylitol, 2.4 calories, mannitol, 2.1, sorbitol, 2.6 calories per gram. Hydrogenated starch hydrolysates is 3 calories per gram, and for mannitol, it'll be 1.6 kilocalories per gram. So in order to help FDA guide its decision making, we updated the information we considered in determining whether the declaration of non-statutory nutrients should be mandatory or voluntary on the label. Under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, some nutrients are required by statute. For example, total fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, total carbohydrates, dietary fiber, and total protein are statutory nutrients. FDA may, by regulation, require other nutrients to be declared if the nutrient will provide information that will assist consumers in maintaining healthy dietary practices. We refer to these nutrients as non-statutory nutrients. One of the factors we considered is whether there is a quantitative intake recommendation for establishing a daily value. For example, does the nutrient have a DRI or a quantitative recommendation in the Dietary Guidelines for Americans that can be used to set a DV? The other factor is, does the nutrient have public health significance or other considerations, for example, for trans fat or added sugars? For the purposes of labeling, we considered a couple of elements in order to determine public health significance. First, we considered whether there is well-established scientific evidence linking a nutrient and a chronic disease risk, a health-related condition, or a physiological endpoint. For example, for nutrients for which there is an RDA or an AI that are based on chronic disease risk, a health-related condition, or physiological endpoint. Also, to determine public health significance, the agency looked at whether or not there was a nutrient deficiency with clinical significance. For example, low iron storage leading to iron deficiency anemia. We also looked at whether there is inadequate or excess intake of the nutrient and substantial prevalence exists in the general U.S. population of the chronic disease, health-related condition, or physiological endpoint linked to that particular nutrient. For example, calcium and the risk of osteoporosis. On the current nutrition facts label, calcium, iron, vitamins A and C are required. Using the criteria we just discussed, based on new analysis that assess nutrient adequacy and other factors, FDA has determined that vitamins A and vitamin C should no longer be mandatory, but can be declared voluntary on the label. It was also determined that vitamin D and potassium would become mandatory. Calcium and iron would continue to be required. Another new change being proposed is the addition of absolute amounts for all vitamins and minerals to be listed on food labels, similar to other nutrients. Currently on food labels, the only percent DV is required. And now it's time for a quiz question. So please answer the poll you see on your computer screen, and we will reveal the answer in a few minutes. Okay. Another proposed change to the nutrition facts label is the addition of added sugars. The current label does not provide information on added sugars. This recommendation was based on the 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommendation to reduce the intake of calories from solid fats and added sugars. For most people, no more than 5 to 15% of total calories from solid fats and added sugars can reasonably be consumed to meet nutrient needs within calorie limits. Currently, Americans on average consume 16% of total calories from added sugars. FDA has proposed a definition for added sugars as any sugar added during the processing of foods or consumed separately. For example, sugars, syrups, naturally occurring sugars that are isolated from a whole food and concentrated so that sugar is the primary component. The rationale for including added sugars on the label is to help consumers reduce calories from added sugar and to increase the intake of nutrient-dense foods without exceeding total calorie needs, and to assist consumers in maintaining healthy dietary practices consistent with the 2010 Dietary Guidelines. Also, it may help consumers identify and compare products with added sugars. And now it's time for our quiz answers. The vitamins and minerals that are currently required on the nutrition facts label are calcium, iron, vitamin A, and vitamin C. And I see that we have a very knowledgeable audience. 85% of you all got that question right, so good job. Another key aspect of this rule is setting new daily values for vitamins and minerals. For the DVs for vitamins and minerals, we propose to continue using the RDA when available for setting a DV. For nutrients for which an RDA could not be set but have an AI, then the AI will be used to set the DV. We are also proposing to continue to use the population coverage approach, which uses the highest RDA or AI as the basis for setting the daily value. Here are some examples of changes to the daily values. Dietary fiber will increase from 25 grams to 28. Sodium will decrease from 2,400 milligrams to 23. Potassium will also increase from 3,500 to 4,700 milligrams per day. Calcium increases from 1,000 milligrams to 1,300 milligrams, and vitamin D will increase from 10 micrograms to 20 micrograms. We are also not proposing to establish a daily value for added sugar. We are also proposing to change the units of measure for some nutrients to be consistent with the units in the IOM DRI reports. For examples, we have proposed to no longer use international units for vitamins A, D, and E, but rather micrograms and milligrams. For folate, we are also proposing to use the unit dietary folate equivalents that was developed by the IOM to account for the differences in bioavailability between naturally occurring folate that is found in food and synthetic forms of folic acid, which are more bioavailable. Another proposed change in this rule is to propose a new definition of dietary fiber. Currently, FDA does not have a definition of dietary fiber. So isolated and synthetic non-digestible carbohydrates without beneficial health effects can currently be added to foods and quantified as dietary fiber. Conversely, there are other fibers with beneficial health effects that can be added to foods but are not quantified in dietary fiber declaration using current analytical methods. We are proposing a definition for total fiber, which is equivalent to the IOM definition. The new definition includes non-digestible carbohydrates and lignin that are intrinsic and intact in plants. This definition also includes added fibers, both isolated or synthetic, that have been determined by FDA to have a physiological benefit. Fibers that have been shown to have a beneficial physiological effect through an authorized health claim, such as barley beta fiber that is added to foods, would meet the definition of dietary fiber since it has been authorized for a health claim. The other way is through a citizen petition. The agency intends to issue guidance to industry on citizens' petitions to substantiate the effects of these added non-digestible carbohydrates that are beneficial to human health. We are also proposing changes to the labeling of foods for infants, young children, pregnant or lactating women. We propose to change the age groups from less than 2 years and 2 years through 3 to be 7 months through 12 months for older infants, 1 year through 3 years for young children, to align with the age groups used by the IOM in the DRI reports. In addition, for pregnant or lactating women, we will be establishing daily values for the same nutrients as established for the general population using a population coverage approach. For foods that are for older infants, we will require the declaration of the percent DV for total fat and total carbohydrate. The DVs for total fat, total carbohydrate, and protein will be based on the adequate intake, or RDA, for older infants. The DVs for vitamins and minerals are based on the RDA-AI for infants 7 to 12 months of age. For foods that are for young children, the DVs are based on RDAs or AIs for children 1 to 3 years of age for the same nutrients set for the general population. In this case, we will be using 1,000 calories to set DVs that are based on a percentage of calories, for example, fat and dietary fiber. We are also proposing the maintenance of records to support the declaration of certain nutrients. Records will be required for both natural and added sugars, folate and folic acid, both dietary fiber and added non-digestible carbohydrates that do not meet the definition of dietary fiber, and for both synthetic and natural forms of vitamin E. And I will now take questions from the audience.
I want to thank you, Crystal, for that wonderful presentation. We're so glad you were able to give it. We have a couple of questions that we must address. The one question that came to us, which I would have told you during my introduction, is that the slides for each of the presentations will be made at the end of the day of the presentation. So for today, the 22nd of September, the slides will be made available to you tonight. And then for tomorrow's presentations, the slides will be made available to you tomorrow night. So thank you for asking us that question as well. Those of you who still want to ask questions, please enter the questions in the Q&A section of your computer of the program. So we have a second question, and that is, can you address the rationale behind the types of fiber that FDA is recognizing as having health benefits on the nutrition facts label? Some people are saying that maybe there are more fibers that could be added to the nutrition facts label. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Crystal to answer that question.
Okay. Well, what we're trying to do here with the proposed rule is to have the declaration of dietary fiber be based on natural, either it's natural or intact in plants, and those fibers meet the definition of dietary fiber. And this definition comes from the IOM-DRI report. So this definition isn't really anything new. But what's different here is for fibers that are being added to foods, right now you can add fibers and they will be analyzed with analytical methods, but they may or may not have any beneficial physiological effect. On the other hand, there's other fibers that are being added that aren't being captured by these analytical methods that then can't be added to the declaration. So what we're trying to do here is with this, either for fibers that have already been approved through an authorized health claim, then those fibers automatically meet the definition. And then for everything else, what will happen is FDA is going to have to determine which fibers have a physiological benefit. So we haven't determined what those are or are not at this point. And so we will be issuing guidance later on how the citizen petition process is going to work and how companies can go about trying to determine which of these have a physiological benefit. But what we're trying to do is make the information given to consumers more truthful, and so that what's being declared actually has a benefit.
Thank you very much. We have additional questions and we still have time to answer them. So the next question is, can you explain the record keeping process, and will these records be made available to the public?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm not a compliance person, but the reason why we need records is because for some of these, particularly the different forms of nutrients, there's no analytical methods to differentiate between the naturally occurring forms. So my understanding is that this would be just like when you go in and inspect. Inspectors go in, they inspect a company, they would inspect the records. Our intention isn't to take these records and make them available, but this is certainly something we'll be considering with this proposed rule. But we need to be able to determine what's being added. For the case of added sugars, what's naturally occurring, what's added, and for these other forms of nutrients, like for folate and folic acid, the difference between which ones are naturally occurring and which ones are synthetic. So we need the record keeping in order to be able to differentiate that.
Well, thank you. And so we have another question. As long as we're on the issue of record keeping, someone asked, can you explain the record keeping for added sugars?
Well, if you're really interested in the details of what we propose, the link on the first slide that takes you to FDA's webpage, and then from there you can find the proposed rule. And there you can get into the weeds on what kind of records we are proposing to require, what the legal authority is. So if you have questions or concerns there, I would encourage you, rather than get into a lengthy debate here about record keeping, to go to the proposed rule and read what the agency's rationale is for requiring this for added sugars.
Yes, and then, you know, the final rule really gives you the final decision of what will happen. So then another question asked about the IOM DRI process. So as we are using the IOM DRI or RDAs, will the label be able to be updated every time IOM updates their DRI? Now that's
the $1 million question. Well, as you know, most of the daily values we have now are based on old and outdated, you know, reports. Many of the current daily values for vitamins and minerals are based from RDAs from 1968. So we've been working on this process for at least 9 or 10 years to try to get these updated. But whether, you know, how that'll impact the final rule, I think hopefully the final rule will be out and, you know, and in the regs before any new DRIs come out. But, you know, right now, my understanding is there's not any under review. There may be in the future, but we'll just have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But again, I mean, rulemaking is not a fast or easy process, so we're just trying to bring these in line with the current science that we have now.
And then there's always the question that says, when will the final rule be ready?
Hopefully before I retire. We really don't know yet. We have received over 8,000 public comments, and not even all of those dockets have loaded up in the system. So as you can imagine, we have a big task ahead of us to go through the public comments, and then we're going to have to begin drafting a final rule. And then, of course, that goes through the clearance process. And then after the final rule is published, and then industry will be given a time to comply in order before you will really see these changes on the label. So it's going to be a number of years before this is, you know, out there on the nutrition facts, you know, on these new nutrition facts that are out there on grocery store shelves, because this is the most significant overhaul of the nutrition facts label in 20 years. And as most of you have probably gathered from this presentation, there is a lot in here that we have to carefully consider, and there's going to be a lot of decisions that's going to have to be made. So hopefully it'll be, you know, sooner rather than later, but I really don't have a specific time frame.
Well, thank you. The questions are continuing, and we have one that asks you basic information about how are the folate equivalents calculated?
Okay, well, again, if you really want to get into weeds, I would go to the units of measure section of the proposed rule. But what we're trying to do here is the IOM, when they established the RDA for folate, it's 400 micrograms of dietary folate equivalents. And because the synthetic forms of folic acid are 1.7 times more bioavailable, we're just trying to capture that so that when people consume a fortified food or a supplement, you can consume less of that food and have the same amount of potency as if you're consuming folate from fruits or vegetables. So that's what we're trying to capture there. But we understand that this is a new unit. It's a new way of, you know, presenting this information to consumers, and it's going to require a lot of consumer education. But the purpose of this is, you know, to really let people know that there really is a difference between fortified foods and food folate.
Very good. Okay, so the last question that we will address is, when will FDA make changes to the nutrient content claims on the label? You're going to look into your crystal ball and tell us that, right?
That I don't know. Again, the first priority is we need to get the nutrition facts finalized, because what these daily values are and what gets finalized then will affect, you know, whether or not any changes need to be made to nutrient content claims. So once we've, you know, we got to get it's kind of like getting the cart before the horse. We've got to get this finalized, and then agency will think about, well, how does this impact other things such as nutrient content claims or health claims. But for right now, the focus is, you know, getting the daily values and the nutrition facts, because that is really the foundation of of a lot of what we do.
And I want to give Crystal Rivers a big thank you for this wonderful presentation, and we're waiting now, looking forward to our next presentation on the proposed rule on serving sizes. Thank you so much.